Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? So thank you for all coming out tonight. Appreciate everybody who donated to CSNYC, which is the beneficiary of all the ticket sales tonight. For those of you who don't know, CSNYC is a nonprofit here in New York that's focused on bringing computer science and programming classes to our public school system, which I think is a cause that we should all be excited about. The more young people that know the essential skills of our time, the better. And so all of us at CSNYC, and there are a bunch of us here, Evan is somewhere. There's Evan, and Cindy's in the back, and I don't know if Sarah's here, but everybody, I know Sean is here and a few others. So we all are very appreciative of your financial support. The reason that I wanted to do this talk is that, come on in, everybody. There are a bunch of things that I'm super excited about right now, and they all sort of come together in this topic. I'm super excited about philanthropy and giving back. I've been very fortunate in my life to have a lot of success, and I'm interested in trying to plow back as much of that success into the world and try to make opportunities for other people. So I'm very excited about philanthropy. I'm very excited about crowdfunding in general, the idea that we can all come together using the internet and our phones to support projects that we believe in, whether they're nonprofits or creative projects on Kickstarter or other things like that. I'm involved with a lot of companies that do that kind of thing. And I'm really excited about Bitcoin and the blockchain. And so what tonight's all about is where all those things come together. And I thought what I would do is I would start out talking a little bit about Bitcoin, and then I'll talk a little bit about crowdfunding, and then I'll talk a little bit about how that all comes together in charitable giving. And then when we're all done with that, I'm going to take some questions from the audience. And we'll see how long it takes me to get through the prepared material, such as it is. Then I'll decide how long we'll take Q&A, but I'm happy to take a fair bit of Q&A. And I'm also happy to take questions that aren't about this topic, although I hope people have questions about this topic because it's quite interesting to me. So as a little bit of an outline, I wrote some notes on my phone, so every time I come back over here and put on my glasses, I'm just referring to my phone. So as an outline, what I thought I would talk about is what is Bitcoin, the history of Bitcoin, the technology of Bitcoin, why Bitcoin's important, and then I'll talk about crowdfunding, Bitcoin, crowdfunding, and charities, some other considerations for giving money to charities via Bitcoin, and then I'll close with some comments. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer network. That means that it's a network built on top of the internet that uses computers all over the internet as peers with each other. There's no central computer in a peer-to-peer network. Everybody's peers in the network to process and clear financial transactions without a company in the middle. And the reason that's important is for as long as we've had sort of computer-based processing of financial transactions, so maybe for 50 years or more, we've had to have a central clearinghouse for all financial transactions. If I send you money, there has to be someone in the middle that says, yeah, Fred sent you the money, we take it out of his account, put it in your account. And what Bitcoin does is it removes the need for that central entity, that central computer, that central company. And that's really important, and I'm going to talk about why that is more, but that's basically what Bitcoin is. And the way I like to think about Bitcoin is like PayPal, but open source, peer-to-peer, and not controlled by a company. So how many of you have PayPal accounts in the audience? All right, so everybody, or many of you understand what PayPal is like. How many of you own Bitcoin? Well, that's fantastic. That's really amazing, actually, and very exciting to me. personally. So a little bit about the history of Bitcoin. October 31st, 2008. So 5.5 years ago now. It's actually a lot longer than most people realize. A paper was published, and the title of that paper, I'll read it and also give you the internet address. The title of the paper was Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It was written by a person named Satoshi Nakamoto. And if you want to read the paper, you can go to https://bitcoin.org/bitcoin.pdf. And so it's unknown whether Satoshi is a real person named Satoshi Nakamoto, whether it's a pseudonym for a real person who didn't want to be named. And there's a lot of reasons why a person like that might not want to be named. I'll tell you about some of them. Or whether it was a group of people who came together and wrote this paper, and they used this name essentially to describe them. And the reason that you might not want to be named is if you create this system, and because you're the creator of the system, you have 1 million Bitcoins, and if those 1 million Bitcoins are now worth $500 each, then you have $500 million worth of Bitcoin. And maybe Satoshi knew that he was creating something that was going to end up being worth lots of money, and he didn't want to be sort of known as you know, a person with a lot of these Bitcoins. That's all theoretical and probably not all that important. But regardless of the identity or author, the technical architecture of Bitcoin is really, really important. And a lot has happened since this paper was published. And I'll give you a little bit of history. So the paper was published in the end of 2008. And in 2009 and 2010 was really the very beginnings of Bitcoin. So a community emerged to create the open source software to actually implement the idea that was written in the paper. And most people believe that Satoshi or the people who wrote the paper or whomever was originally involved in that community. And that group of people who wrote that software are called the core developers. They're the people who are allowed to commit code to the open source software that runs Bitcoin. Also, at the beginning of that time, mining started to happen. Bitcoin started to get created. I'll talk about mining in a little bit more detail in a second. People started to build wallets, and people started to hold and own Bitcoin. But this was all very, very sort of grassroots, emergent type behavior, and it was very much not mainstream. If you go back to that time, 2009, 2010, and Google and try to find articles that were written about Bitcoin, you'll see that there were some things that were written in the hacker community and the technical community, but nobody in the mainstream world was writing about Bitcoin. I found out about Bitcoin in early 2011. A friend of mine, Ricky Tata, told me about it, and I became instantly fascinated with it and have continued to be fascinated ever since. 2011 and 2012 is the period that I like to call the speculation period. This is the time when people started to realize that this was a financial asset and that it could have value. And so more people started to mine, which is effectively the free way to get Bitcoin, or actually buy Bitcoin. Exchanges started to develop. That's where people trade Bitcoin. And we started to see a lot of speculation, a lot of accumulation of Bitcoin, and we saw rapid price increases followed by plunges, followed by rapid price increases, followed by plunges. And that period, 2011, 2012, was a period where I was reading, learning, and really trying to understand Bitcoin. And the thing that kept impressing me was that every time the price would collapse, and everybody would say, oh, see this thing as a joke, it wouldn't go to zero. And there was people buying it, and it would bounce back. And after it bounced back the third or fourth time, I really started to believe, that there was something here that was important, and that ultimately caused me to make our first investment, which is in this company, Coinbase. And then 2013, 2014, I'm sorry. I skipped the whole phase. 2011, 2012, actually, in my mind, is not the phase of speculation. It was the phase of vice. That was the phase where Silk Road got built, and lots of sketchy people were doing sketchy things with Bitcoin, mostly trading guns and drugs and other kinds of illegal activities. And the reason for that is that it was certainly back then and even today possible to use Bitcoin anonymously. And so if you were doing something illegal, by paying for it in Bitcoin, that financial transaction wouldn't be traceable back to you. And so that was really, in some ways, every piece of new technology needs some group to adopt it first, to give it real heat. And in many cases, the first adopters of new technologies are sketchy people. And it's just, if you go back in time, for example, like, the VCR, the mythology goes, was really, adopted by the pornography industry first. So that's another example of sketchy people doing sketchy things. So then in 2013, 2014 is really the period of speculation. We're, a year and a half into that. And then I think what we're going to get into in 2015 and 2016 is more payments, people paying for things, real things. And the other thing is developers building on top of it. We're already seeing that happening now, but I think that's going to start to become the dominant behavior. So that's a little bit of a history of Bitcoin. So now I want to talk a little bit about the technology of Bitcoin. And this is where I'm going to really have to pay attention to my notes, because I'm not as much of a technologist as some of my colleagues are. And as much as I've read about this, I'm not probably the biggest expert in it. So Bitcoin is implemented in open source software, as I mentioned before. And there's a group of core developers, many of which have been working on it since the early days, who are building most of the software that runs Bitcoin. And what's important about that is that the code is out there in the open, and anybody can go look at it, and they can see how this whole system works, which is very important because it allows people to have trust in the system, or at least to have an opinion about the system. Open source is transparent. Closed source is not. And so that's a big part of why Bitcoin is important, is that it's open source. As I mentioned, Bitcoin operates in a peer-to-peer system. So every node, every machine that's out there is running the Bitcoin software and is doing one of two things. It's either mining for Bitcoin or holding Bitcoin. Mining, I'll talk a little bit about more, is the process of finding Bitcoin and also clearing transactions. And wallets are the software that hold Bitcoin. The other really important piece of the Bitcoin technology is something called the blockchain, which is this ledger where all of the Bitcoin transactions are cleared. And that ledger, that blockchain ledger, is on every machine that's running the Bitcoin software. If you've got a wallet, it's got a copy of the ledger on it. And if you're mining, you've got a copy of the ledger on it. And this ledger is public, and you can actually see the transactions flying back and forth. You don't necessarily know who's sending the money to who, but you can see how much money is being sent. And every node, every wallet, every holder of Bitcoin has a key. There's a lot of cryptography involved. There's a key, an address, and so you can see that this address sent Bitcoin to this address, but it's hard to know that that address is Fred Wilson, and so that's why a lot of these transactions have been done anonymously. That's starting to change. I can talk a little bit about that if people want to. So what miners do is they hash for and look through the Bitcoin headers, and they look for. It's basically solving a math problem, a cryptological problem, looking for valid transactions that clear. And this is the mining is, and when they find valid transactions to clear, they get paid with a little bit of Bitcoin. That's why it's called mining. There's a total of 21 million Bitcoin that can be created. We're about 2/3 of the way through creating all of that Bitcoin. It's getting harder and harder and harder to mine for Bitcoin, so you're getting less and less and less as you do this. But all this compute power that miners have built up is the compute power that's essentially running the transaction processing system that's clearing the Bitcoin. And that, I think, is actually the genius of the whole thing, is to come up with some economic model that incents people for doing this. So there's two kinds of wallets that are important to know about. There's desktop wallets, where you're running the software on your computer and your Bitcoin's in that software. Early on, that was the dominant way people held Bitcoin. Then created cloud-based wallets, which are wallets in the cloud where a third party, and this company Coinbase that we're investors in operates the biggest of these, allows you to store your Bitcoin in the cloud with them. Now, everybody who owns Bitcoin has something called a key. There's a private key and a public key. That's how cryptography works. And if you hold your key, you can unlock your wallet anytime you want. If you lose your key, you're screwed. You can't get your Bitcoin out. Now, the nice thing about a hosted wallet is they hold your keys for you. But some people don't like the idea that a third party is holding their keys. And so there's this hybrid model for wallets where the wallet's in the cloud, but the end user keeps the key. And so there's really sort of two main kinds with a hybrid. And then the last thing that's worth talking about in terms of the architecture of Bitcoin is just kind of how it works. So if I have Bitcoin in my wallet and I send it to you, it's going to end up in your wallet. That's the transaction that's going to get cleared on the blockchain. And basically, you'll see some coin coming out of my wallet and going into yours. And so that's the technology of Bitcoin. I'm happy to take some questions when we get to Q&A about this if you're confused, although it's very possible that there are people in the audience that can explain this in more technical detail than I am. I'm absolutely certain there are people in the audience who know this better than I do. So why is this important? Bitcoin is like the internet. The thing that's so amazing about the internet, if you think about it, it's this network, this global network that connects 2 billion people or more now around the world to each other that is not owned by anybody. It's literally not owned by anybody. It's not like AT&T owns the internet or Cablevision owns the internet or Deutsche Telekom owns the internet. It's not owned by anybody. It's this cooperative network. And we have all these protocols like TCP/IP and HTTP and SMTP that basically describe how the internet communications happens, and it grows and it prospers, and yet nobody controls it. And nobody needs permission from anybody, any company or anybody, to put a server on the internet and start up a company. And there's nobody that you got to pay to do that. Yes, you need to, if you want to have Amazon host your server, yes, you have to pay for that. But it's not like you need to pay somebody to put a server on the internet. It's an open platform. No middlemen, no gatekeepers, nobody controls it. And it's that set of features that has made it the greatest platform for innovation, at least in the world of computing and technology since computers were invented. And Bitcoin has those same characteristics. It's open, nobody controls it, and anybody can use it. And what developers want when they build on top of a piece of technology is they want all those things. And the reason they want all those things is they want to know that if they build the next Facebook or they build the next YouTube, that no one's going to say, you know what? I want all that for myself. They don't want anybody to be able to have the keys to the castle. And so by building on an open platform that nobody controls, that you don't require any permissions to use, developers can have confidence to invest a lot of their time and energy and money in building on top of. And I think what we will see is that Bitcoin will do for financial and transactions and money what the internet has done for media and commerce and communication. And I think it's really important. I think we're just at the beginning of it. So that's why Bitcoin's important. So let's talk a little bit about crowdfunding. So what's interesting about crowdfunding is that it couldn't exist without the internet. And I like to tell a story. Perry Chen, who's the founder of Kickstarter, had the original idea for Kickstarter when he was an artist living in New Orleans about 10 years ago. And he wanted to bring an electronic musician, actually I think a couple of musicians, to New Orleans to play a concert. And he had this idea. He said, what if we could just like put something up on the internet and people would come and say, yeah, I want to see them, yeah, I want to see them, yeah, I want to see them. And if we get enough people to say, yeah, I want to see them, then we'll have the money and we can bring them here. And he didn't pull it off, but that was the original idea. And of course, before the internet existed, how would you do that? But with the internet, it's not that hard to do that, and so crowdfunding emerged. This year on Kickstarter, probably $500, $600, $700 million will be given, not pledged, I don't like to use the word given, pledged to musicians and artists and filmmakers to make creative projects. And it happens because people come together, they see a project they like, they contribute a small amount of money. And it's interesting that people raise tens of millions of dollars in $5, $10, $25, $50 pledges, right? So it's millions of people or thousands of people or tens of thousands of people giving relatively small amounts of money that allows something to happen. So crowdfunding is a very powerful model for funding all sorts of things. And we see entrepreneurs raising money for their startups on crowdfunding platforms like AngelList and CircleUp. We see people borrowing money to buy a house or get a car on crowdfunding platforms like Lending Club. And we see filmmakers raising money to make a movie on Kickstarter. And we see charities raising money for their charitable causes on crowdfunding platforms like CrowdRise, which is a company that our firm is invested in that is a crowdfunding platform for charitable giving. And so what crowdfunding has done is it's leveraged the internet and the couple billion people that are on the internet to bring people together who share a common interest to give small amounts of money, but in the aggregate, it turns into large amounts of money. And so charities that have adopted this model have really, really succeeded in the past few years. And the two best examples are Charity Water and Donors Choose. I think those are the two charities that have done the best job of leveraging crowdfunding and the internet to drive charitable giving. Now, for charities, traditionally, if you go back to the way charities operated before the internet, what they would do is they would raise money from wealthy supporters. So most of the money would come from their board and a few very wealthy people who could give tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then they might run, an annual gala where they, throw a big dinner and they have, a big event and people will buy tables and the tables would be $5,000 or $10,000 and you'd sell 50 tables or 100 tables. You'd produce this fancy event, feed everybody, and you'd make $1 million and a couple $100,000 of it would be spent on the caterer and the venue and everything else. So it's a very expensive and frankly laborious and time-consuming effort to raise capital. And so if you look at the finances of a charity, they might spend $2 million a year or $3 million a year on their cause, but they might spend another $1 million a year just raising all that money. And so, the typical number here is charities spend 20 to 25% of their annual budget just raising the money. Well, that's a very large tax on a charity. And everybody who gives to a charity would like to see every dollar they're giving a charity go to the cause. They don't want it to go to fundraising expenses and so on and so forth. So the first big move for charities was the internet and these crowdfunding models and crowdfunding platforms like CrowdRise that have allowed them to stop doing the annual gala, to stop relying on people who could write 6- and 7-figure checks, and start to raise money in 5s and 10s and 20s and 50s and 100s. And that has allowed charities like Charity Water and Donors Choose to reduce the amount of money they spend on fundraising by a lot. But there's a floor right now, and that's the processing fees. So you can eliminate all of those costs of throwing the big dinners and all that, but what you can't eliminate is when I whip out my credit card and give you my number, 3.5% of that is going to go to Visa, and there's probably some other costs along the way. And so even if you completely take out all of the other costs because of the internet, you can't take out the transaction costs. And that's where Bitcoin comes in. Because there is no Visa, there's no American Express, there's no MasterCard, there's no middleman, if I give a charity a Bitcoin, the charity can keep that Bitcoin, and they don't have to pay anything. The thing that's cool about Bitcoin is it's like cash on a wire or cash over the air. It's like I'm giving you, a $5 bill, but it comes into your account over the internet, and there's nobody to pay for that transaction. And that's a big deal. You look at a nonprofit that raises $2 or $3 million over the internet. If they can get rid of that 5%, that's a lot of money. And so I think this is where Bitcoin will really help nonprofits take out that last little bit. And with the internet, crowdfunding, and Bitcoin, we can imagine a world where when any of us give money to a cause on the internet, all of that money is going to go to the cause we care about, and none of it's going to go to some third party who's making money off of the charity. So I want to talk a little bit about a few other considerations that we need to think about here. And I don't think this is going to happen overnight. There's 3 considerations that I think are interesting to think about as charities start accepting more and more Bitcoin. The first is that not everybody has Bitcoin, and tonight is a really good example of this. So we said, if you come tonight, you're either a student, in which case we have sponsors who were making donations to cover the students, or you're buying a $25 ticket, and some generous people bought $100 tickets. Thank you for the extra money that you all spent. But you had to pay it in Bitcoin. And I got a lot of emails from people, particularly in the last few days, who said, I don't have any Bitcoin. I would have to buy the Bitcoin. It's going to take me 3 days for the Bitcoin to show up in my account, and so I'm not going to be able to give the Bitcoin in time to make it to the event. And so if you had Bitcoin in your account, it was simple. You just gave whatever, half a Bitcoin, no, not half a Bitcoin, half a Bitcoin would be $250. You gave, I guess, 0.05 of a Bitcoin, and you come. So not enough people have it. And forcing people to buy the Bitcoin to give the money to the charity isn't a great model. And we actually saw that in this event, which is kind of cool. So some of the problems that I wanted to talk about are problems that we actually experienced. And I kind of like the fact that this whole thing kind of happened that way. What some charities do is they let you either give Bitcoin or buy with a credit card, but they encourage you to give with Bitcoin. And so there are ways that charities are kind of pushing people to do this, but at the same time not forcing them. So that's one consideration. I think it will take time. If I asked people in the audience how many people had PayPal accounts, and I think we saw maybe 70% of the audience raise their hand. If we asked you that question 5 years ago, maybe it would have been 40% of the audience, and if we asked it 10 years ago, it might have been 10% of the audience. So over time, I think more and more people will have Bitcoin, they'll have a Coinbase account, and they'll be able to use that account for this kind of thing. But that's the first consideration. The second consideration is these charities have expenses that they have to pay in dollars or in euros or in some other currency. And so if we went all out and raised $500,000 in Bitcoin, they can't pay their employees in Bitcoin yet. They can't pay for the other services they need in Bitcoin yet. So they got to convert those Bitcoin to dollars. And that's where a platform like Coinbase is really helpful. If charities use Coinbase to accept the Bitcoin, Coinbase immediately turns, if you want, immediately turns those into dollars. And the first $1 million they do that for you is free, and then after that they take a 1% fee on that. And I think that there's some additional discounts for charities.
Can you say that again, that last line?
Yeah. So what happens is if I give 1 Bitcoin to CSNYC through Coinbase, Coinbase immediately turns that into dollars. Let's say if the current market for Bitcoin is $550 per Bitcoin, they would immediately turn that into $550 and then send that money to Coinbase's bank account. The first $1 million of that they do is free. And then after that, for big companies, they charge 1% on every additional dollar that they do that. But I think for charities, there's some additional discount. And their partnership with CrowdRise, it takes advantage of all of that. So that's the second thing, is that when you accept Bitcoin, you don't have to take Bitcoin risk. You can just immediately turn it into dollars. And the third consideration, which is an interesting one, is taxes. So the IRS said earlier this year that Bitcoin, in their mind, is not a currency, it's property. And most Bitcoin enthusiasts, such as myself, don't think that's the right policy. And I'm hoping that eventually the IRS will recognize Bitcoin as a currency. But right now, that's not the case, and that actually provides an opportunity to charities. Because if you own property, like if you own 100 shares of Google that you bought for $20 a share that are now worth $400 a share, and if you give those shares to CSNYC, which we'd be happy to take, you do not have to pay capital gains tax on that, which you would have to do if you sold them, and you get a tax deduction on the whole amount. So that basically gives you a double benefit that effectively makes the cost of that gift a third of what it would cost you to pay it in taxes. And so there are a lot of people out there in this world who now are holding millions of dollars of Bitcoin that they bought for $1 a Bitcoin or $2 a Bitcoin or $4 a Bitcoin. And if you're a charity and you can identify some of those people, you could go to them and say, hey, give us $50,000 worth of Bitcoin since you have 5 million of them, dollars worth, and it will only cost you really only cost you $15,000 because you're going to get the tax deduction and you're going to avoid paying the capital gains. So that's a technique that a lot of charities use with people who own a lot of stock, and it's a technique that charities can use now for people who own a lot of Bitcoin. So in summary, Bitcoin is a revolutionary new technology that businesses and charities need to pay attention to. It lowers the cost of financial transactions. It's programmable, meaning you can build on top of it. There are APIs like the Coinbase API that you plug into Bitcoin very inexpensively in code. If you're a developer, I would encourage you to work on Bitcoin, understand it, get comfortable building on top of it. It's like Bitcoin today is like learning how to write iOS code 7 years ago. The demand for people who know Bitcoin and can build on top of it is going to go through the roof. If you're a business, start accepting it. You can accept it through Coinbase, and it's pretty easy and not going to cost you much. And if you're a charity, start accepting it. You can do that with CrowdRise, or you can do it by going directly to Coinbase if you have your own platform for raising money. And as you can tell, I'm a believer. I think, like all things, it's important to be early to technologies like this. You got to get on board them when people are still skeptical. You need to get on board them when there's still technical issues that are unresolved. And you need to help resolve those technical issues. And that the people who get there early are usually rewarded for their leadership. And so that's what I'm excited about. So it's 10 after 7. I think that means I'll take about 20 minutes of questions. And we have microphones here if you want to come up and stand in front of the microphones, but you don't have to. If you want to just stand up and speak loudly, you can do that too. Maybe we'll try to take at least a few questions about this general subject matter to start, and then if people want to start going in other directions, I'm happy to do that as well. So the question is, what about the anonymity of Bitcoin? As I said, people can hide behind their Bitcoin addresses. And so it's hard to know who that person is. So a couple things about this. In the core Bitcoin system, there's some new stuff that the core developers have put in around payments that have the ability to attach identity, real name identity, to an address if you want. And so we're starting to see a lot of companies start to implement that and even require it. So a company like Coinbase, which works with the banking system here in the United States, because you can ACH money into Coinbase, is being, frankly, pushed to put more and more know your customer, anti-money laundering types of systems in place around their Bitcoin system. And so I think they're not the only ones who will do that. So I think what we will see emerge is services and even blockchains that will be built to cater to the people who want to remain anonymous, the sort of the gray market or the black market, and I think we will continue to see that. But I think there will emerge a set of services that are more white market services, more legitimate services that will start to implement a bunch of identity stuff. And there are Bitcoin purists who will say, oh, that's going to ruin everything. But I actually think by embracing sort of the world we live in today and the requirement to be comfortable with identity, we will see the companies like Coinbase who do that, I think, will flourish and become even more successful.
What obstacles do you think need to be removed before the IRS and mainstream public accept Bitcoin as a legitimate currency?
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of issues. The question was, what needs to happen before people believe Bitcoin is really a currency, including the IRS? I think volatility, for one, is a huge issue, right? It's with all of the, spikes and price rises and crashes, it doesn't feel like a currency. The very fact that, a business or a charity would immediately get it and want to turn it into dollar kind of suggests that it's not a currency. So it needs to stabilize. People need to feel comfortable that if they hold on to a Bitcoin for a week or a month, it's going to be worth pretty much the same as it was when they got it. And that may take a long time. I also think we need to see real transaction volume happen where right now, most people who get Bitcoin hold it. They don't transact with it. And that's part of what causes, I think, all of the volatility. If there was a very vibrant system where Bitcoin was just getting swapped around like crazy, the velocity of the money, if you're an economist, the velocity of the money, I think, would cause Bitcoin to start price to stabilize, and it would be a much more liquid market. And so I think those are the kinds of things that, as an economist, you'd want to see. And then I think if we saw those, we could start to make arguments to the policymakers that, hey, see, this isn't property, it's a currency. So I think it's going to take some time.
Thank you.
We'll go over here.
Why would you want it to be considered a currency when there's so many benefits for it to just remain a property?
Well, I think the real power of Bitcoin, this is going to give you my opinion as opposed to, I'm not sure that this is right or wrong, but my opinion is that the most powerful uses of Bitcoin are as a global system that will work in any country in the world that's built on top of the internet for people to exchange value back and forth. And so I think we have to see people start to really use it in the way that they use money, that they're spending it all the time and transacting it all the time. And I think that if people's notions of Bitcoin are that it's property that you want to hold on and speculate on the way you would with gold or a building or a stock, I don't think we will realize all the potential transactional and financial benefits of Bitcoin.
Thank you.
Hi, my question is about what you think about the security if you're using Bitcoin.
Right.
So how secure undergoing a transaction with them would be as opposed to traditional ways?
Right. So it's not particularly secure. I'm glad you brought that point up. I mean, one of the real issues with Bitcoin right now is it's not that secure. And the reason it's not that secure is that it's easy to hack into people's computers. If they have a wallet on their own computer, it's easy to get in there and steal the Bitcoin. Bitcoin theft is a big issue. Bitcoin fraud is a big issue. And what will have to happen is that we will need to see companies like Coinbase and others emerge that can invest heavily in security. And that's both technological security and also process security to make you comfortable to keep your Bitcoin there. I think that that's going to be probably the first big commercial opportunity in Bitcoin is to create secure systems. Because without that, I don't think we'll ever get enough confidence and trust in the system for people to really start using it.
Do you think that would somehow affect the notion of, so you're saying that Bitcoin is special because there's no middleman?
Right.
So do you think adding these companies would sort of affect that?
That's a great question. So so you're just replacing the old middleman with the new middleman.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's true, but because Bitcoin is an open source, peer-to-peer network, there's nothing stopping 30 or 50 or 100 Coinbases to get built up on top of it. And so there's nothing proprietary here. The system is open, everybody understands the protocol. And so the companies that succeed, I think, will succeed by providing good service, security, and things like that. But so I think what that will mean is that we'll keep the transaction costs very low. Not non-existent, because you're right. It's going to take some transaction costs to support the engineers and the systems and the processes that provide things like security, fraud protection, and all that. But I suspect that because these companies are getting built on top of an open system as opposed to a proprietary system, and competitive pressures in the marketplace that an open system enforces will make those costs a lot lower.
Okay, thank you.
So my question is, well, clearly you've demonstrated that Bitcoin is beneficial for individuals, for nonprofits, but influential companies like Visa, like MasterCard, all those guys, how are they retaliating, or are they just kind of brushing it off at the moment?
Well, I think that they're not particularly worried about Bitcoin right now, which is why I think it's a great time to invest, because what I have seen over the years, and there's no reason why this movie needs to have the exact same script as all these other movies I've seen, but what I have seen again and again and again, I saw it with the internet in '93 and '94, I saw it with companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and saw it with mobile phones. There's a classic, when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, the CEO of BlackBerry called it a toy, laughable, right? What happens is big companies, what I've seen again and again and again, when something new comes along like this, they first ignore it, then they laugh at it, then they kind of downplay it, then they tell some people inside their company, hey, let's start looking at this. And that usually gives the startups and the real innovators a 5, 7, 10-year runway to try to build something. And the scary thing is, all of a sudden, they're like, whoa, you know, by the time they realize it's important, they're behind the 8 ball. And so my guess is that's what's going to happen with Visa, MasterCard, American Express. Maybe not. Maybe this time movie won't play out that way. But I was going to say if I'm a betting man, but I am a betting man. That's the bet I'm willing to make.
Thank you.
What's your take on the robustness of the core development team? It seems like so far they've been working sort of as, in a beneficial way and pro bono, but obviously that's sort of a fragile system.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem, honestly. There are a couple of efforts underway. There's a group here in New York that's emerged that they're trying to put together a group of 5 or 10 engineers to just work on the core system, and there's some people in Stanford that are talking about doing that too. I think we need a much bigger group of engineers, and we need an economic model to support those engineers. And there's a bunch of good ideas out there about how to do that. But I think you're absolutely right. We don't have enough engineering resources on it right now. The people who are doing it, are, frankly, doing it as a labor of love, and that's not sustainable. So I think you put a finger on a big problem, and we'll just say there's some people, smart people, working on trying to come up with a model to fix that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. First off, before I go into my question, I just want to say I'm actually here with a program called Girls Who Code. It teaches high school girls basically how to code different coding languages. I just want to thank you for giving this talk really quickly, so I could get kind of a glimpse into what the tech world looks like. So my question is, basically what you were saying with Bitcoin is that for charity, to kind of influence charity in one way or another, it's getting rid of the middleman. Do you think that the same process can kind of be applied to the political world? Absolutely.
Absolutely. In fact, whenever I talk to politicians, well, I want to say a couple things. One, Girls Who Code is an amazing program. I love Girls Who Code. And I just, every time I go visit a Girls Who Code group, I'm just blown away by all the amazing girls who are coding. So anyway, I love your program. So I'll tell you a story. It's a funny story. So about 10 years ago, there was a whole bunch of people in Congress that were going to write a law to write some rules about email marketing. And I went down to lobby Congress. I'm not going to name any names, but I'm in the room with a senator, and I'm explaining what spam is and the kind of rules that we need to create so that people can't just spam everybody. And this senator said to me, do you mean I could just send an email to like 1 million people and asking them to give me money? And I said, yes, you could, but we're trying to regulate that. And he said, you know what? We're going to regulate it, but we're going to grandfather the Congress and the Senate. And it opened my eyes to the fact that the way you get the Congress and the Senate interested in them is convincing them it can make them money. And so the way we're going to get the Congress and the Senate interested in Bitcoin is we're going to teach them that they get donations through it. So that's a genius idea. Thank you for it.
Hi, I'm with a program called ScriptEd, where they teach...
Another great program.
They teach... basically, the program teaches coding to schools that don't have the program in the school.
Mm-hmm.
I was with the first year, and unfortunately, I graduated high school this year, so I can't take the program anymore. But because of the program, I was able to get an internship at a great company, About.com.
Sure.
Which is providing me great help with learning how to code. But my question is, so you said they donate Bitcoins through Coinbase, and you can automatically transfer it into money and give it to charities. What happens to the Bitcoin? Does it go back into the market to be mineable?
It is exactly, no, not to be mineable. Once a Bitcoin is mined, it exists, right? To think about Bitcoin a little bit like gold, right? Once you pull the gold out of the ground, you've mined the gold, now you have the gold, right? So what happens is there are these things called exchanges. This is a great question. So what CrowdRise does with the Bitcoin is they send it over to Coinbase, and Coinbase either puts it in your account, or if you want dollars, they go to an exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange, although it's not the New York Stock Exchange, but an exchange, a Bitcoin exchange, and they sell that Bitcoin and get dollars. They put the dollars in your account, and that Bitcoin that you gave ends up belonging to somebody else. That's how it works.
Thank you.
You got a question? Right. Right. Right.
And he thought that there was not any incentive system. I think he's building White House or some
Right.
kind of marketplace for it. Who besides companies like you already, who show what they're proposing right now in terms of innovation, would push money into those crowdsourcing applications? Because like Ripple, I know Ripple has the same problem. They send out bounties, but their XRP is worth nothing right now. It doesn't really sort of incentivize anyone to step up to the plate. That's what they tell me.
Right.
So who are companies besides you, BitPay, that would actually be sending out bounties to these developers to sort of?
What I think is going to happen is I think that these, the question is, who's going to pay for all these core developers to continue to write and develop the open source software? And I think what's going to happen is companies like Coinbase and BitPay and Circle and Zappo, blockchain. There's a bunch of companies now. I mean, if you looked at the number of Bitcoin companies that have raised venture capital, it's probably in the 20, 30, 40 companies now. But I think all of these companies are going to realize that they need to basically have 2 or 3 developers on their payroll who are spending all their time on core development work. They're going to effectively subsidize some of that. And then I think you're going to see companies like Google and Amazon and PayPal, eBay, start to realize that they have a vested interest in this too, and they're going to start doing that. I think that's ultimately what's going to happen here. Let's take one more from the seated audience, and then we'll go back to this. Go ahead.
How do you see the long-term, very long-term future of Bitcoin? Let's say you have 21 million, they're gone, they're worth $10,000 each, it's a big number. How do you see what's happened next? There are more transactions, there's tendency for accumulation. Once you know it's a commodity that grows, you want to accumulate more, it ends up in the hands of a few people. How do you see it?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's a big debate going on right now about that. There are people who think that the thing to do is to treat it like a commodity or property and hold it and just watch it go up. I think that doesn't end well, because then it's just a tulip, right? I think unless we see it have real economic value in the sense that it gets transacted and it becomes effectively a currency, I don't think it will sustain its value. And so I think the long term, I don't really care whether the stable price for Bitcoin is $100 or $500 or $1,000 or $10,000. It's irrelevant to me. What I want to see happen is the velocity of it go through the roof, and then to have the price stabilize and for it to feel more like $1 or feel more like €1. That's what I hope the long-term potential is.
But it's sort of difficult because the more transactions there are, the more use, the more practice, the more, what you describe, the more attractive it is.
Yeah, but if that causes the price to stabilize, and all of a sudden you can't make any money by holding it, or you can't make a lot of money by holding it, people will start transacting with it more, I think, and treat it more like $1. Holding on to $1 doesn't do anything for you. You know, you put it in the bank, still doesn't do much for you. You turn around and invest it, it'll do something for you. You turn the dollar into a share of Google, and all of a sudden you got something that's appreciating. So that's my hope for Bitcoin. I'm going to take a couple more questions. We'll go to the audience. Where were we? When was it? I think over here, yeah.
Hi, so I was just hoping to get your thoughts on the likes of the Ethereum project and ways that the blockchain and the protocol can be used to confirm additional transactions, and also even alternative peer-to-peer networks like MadeSafe that in many ways remove the blockchain altogether.
Right. Okay, so this is a great question. The question is really around what people are calling blockchains, alternative blockchains, right? So the thing that created Bitcoin could be used to create anything else, right? You could basically mirror that and create something else. And we've heard about Ripple, and we've heard about Ethereum, and there's Dogecoin and Litecoin, Feathercoin, Darkcoin. And so these are called alternative blockchains because they are alternative blockchains. Ethereum is particularly interesting because they're trying to implement the ability to do smart contracts and a lot of things that would give you even more power as a development environment than Bitcoin itself. The challenge is always getting enough mining power on these alternative blockchains and enough liquidity and enough financial kind of activity on them. And so while I think that there are a lot of interesting ideas in Ethereum in particular, I think we need to see it launch. We need to see if it can scale. We need to see if it gets a lot of people mining it and a lot of people building on top of it. And if they can accomplish all of that, I think it has great potential. But really, they need to launch it and see what happens.
Thank you.
Hi, Fred.
Hi.
I see a lot of companies accepting Bitcoin, like earlier in Overstock, right now Expedia, Dash Network, and lately Newegg. Did you ever talk to your portfolio companies like Kickstarter and ask them maybe whether they would accept?
I would like to see Kickstarter accept Bitcoin. I'd like to see Etsy accept Bitcoin. I'd like to see Shapeways accept Bitcoin. They all have it somewhere on their roadmap. It's not as high of a priority for them as maybe I would want it to be, but they run the company, I don't, and it's not my job to tell them what to do. I can suggest, cajole, advise, plead, beg. Eventually it'll happen.
Okay. Cool, thanks.
Hi. First, I wanted to thank the donations for allowing me to attend.
Great.
I'm a student at the Flatiron School.
Awesome.
I'm very happy to be here. I have a three-part question. What are some of the technical challenges right now to preventing widespread acceptance of Bitcoin? Also, as a student developer, what are ways that you could recommend to get involved in Bitcoin from the programming side? And what is some examples of software other than related to security that you look forward to seeing in the coming future?
Well, so I'll answer them. I think the biggest challenge to widespread adoption is just that people aren't familiar enough with it. And that's why I really encourage, particularly all of you who are, a lot of you who are students and learning computer science and programming, to get engaged in it. And I think the more people that understand it and can build on top of it, the better. So that's what I think is holding us back, and I think that's what we need to change. What I would say is if you want to get involved, you're probably not going to be a core developer right away. Okay? If you're at the Flatiron School, it's probably not the right place for you. But you can build on top of these APIs. There's a Coinbase API, there's a Chain.com API, there's 3 or 4 other APIs out there, and build something. Build a wallet or build, I don't know, a crowdfunding platform that just uses Bitcoin or something. It doesn't even have to be something that's going to turn into something that's real. A lot of times just prototyping something and playing with it and proving that it actually works and that you can build it is great. And it'll also teach you how these APIs work, and you'll learn some cryptography, which is really important to understand. So that's what I would advise you to do.
Thank you.
So you were talking about a possible future where most people interact with Bitcoin through sites like Coinbase. They have an account instead of using it directly. And most of the Bitcoin development work is paid for by companies like Amazon and Google.
Right.
So I guess my question is, for those of us who care about networks that are open and peer-to-peer and not run by middlemen, that sounds like exactly what we should be fighting against. So what is the benefit of replacing PayPal and the banks with Coinbase and Amazon and Google?
Yeah, I'm not sure that Amazon and Google are going to get into Bitcoin in a big way anytime soon. I think if you care about open networks, build competitors to these companies. Build services. Like the way you keep things open is by having lots of competitors. The more competition there is in a market, the more honest everybody is kept. If we just let 1 or 2 companies run the table on this category, then that's going to be bad. But if we have, right now there's only 3 real credit card processing systems. Yeah, there's others, but many websites you go to if you want to use a credit card, it's Visa, MasterCard, Amex. Those are your choices, right? There should be 50 or 100. How much time do I have? 10 minutes. So I would say compete, build stuff, you know, and it's early, right? Nobody has a huge advantage here in this market yet. All right, so I'm got 10 minutes. There's no way I'm going to get through everybody who's lined up and a bunch of people in the audience. So I think what I'll do is, just to be fair to everybody, I'll take 2 more questions from you two, and then I'll take 2 from the audience, and that's going to be it. Sorry, Sean.
So you talk about one of the things that's preventing widespread use of Bitcoin is the idea that it's a commodity and not a currency.
Right.
And my macro could be rusty because I wasn't an econ major. But from what I understand in terms of it capping out at 21 million, like modern currencies, there's inflationary pressure.
Right.
So if I hold on to my dollar, not only do I like not gain money, I lose a little bit. So there's this incentive to invest it or to spend it to sort of retain value. And as far as I understand Bitcoin, it seems like there will be deflationary pressure. Like once it caps out at 21 million,
right,
holding on, if anything, assuming economies grow, like would make it more value. Like
Yeah.
it looks like gold
Right.
more than dollars or euros.
This is the thing that gives me the most pause about Bitcoin, actually, is the hard cap and the deflationary aspect of it. There are a lot of people who say because it's infinitely divisible, we don't have that issue. It doesn't ring true to me. It doesn't sound right. What I'm hoping is that we maybe can make some changes to the core protocol, the core system over time, to potentially allow for it to grow as the dollar value or the gross value of it in some measure expands. But I think that really, if you want to get to like what is the one aspect of it that gives me some heartburn, that you've just put your finger on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. I want to ask about the market structure of Bitcoin if it becomes a currency. So if you look at platforms like Lending Club, open peer-to-peer,
right.
Now from bigger institutional firms like banks are coming on and lending on Lending Club. So it's
right.
the same old players
right.
doing things in a new way.
Right.
So how do you see the market structure of Bitcoin evolving, and how do network effects and things like that play into that?
Yeah, it's a great criticism of some of these platforms that they're not really changing the game entirely, right? In the early days of Lending Club, it was truly peer-to-peer. It was me lending to you or you lending to me. Now what's happened is hedge funds are coming on and lending to you and me. It's become more institutional. I think that's a legitimate concern. I think that people will come in and they will create new forms of peer-to-peer lending. There are already people who are trying to build peer-to-peer lending platforms that use Bitcoin. So, what I would just say is the world moves in cycles, right? You have periods of innovation where new systems are created, new companies are created, disruption happens. Those disruptors become the new incumbents, more disruption happens, and the only way to really keep innovating is to just never stop thinking about how do we build something better than that thing. So that's my only good answer to that.
Thanks.
I'm going to take 2 questions from the crowd after the 4 of you go.
I'm also with Girls Who Code, so
Awesome.
I want to thank you for this talk and everything. My question is, you said Bitcoin is like a currency. So do you think that Bitcoin could replace or become better or more efficient than things like Western Union that can transfer money all over the world, and even to places that aren't as technologically advanced, like maybe places in Africa where there might not be as much technology, but it's very lucrative to be sending money to these places because many times these places or villages rely on money from America or more developed countries. So do you think Bitcoin could be an avenue for money transfer? And do you think that it'd be lucrative to look at being in charge of that part of the money transfer and going all over the world?
Absolutely. First of all, I think this potentially is the first real killer app for Bitcoin, is basically money transfer around the world. I mean, you said, could it be more efficient than Western Union?
Because more peer-to-peer.
There's nothing that's less efficient than Western Union. I mean, it's just a terrible system that just takes a lot of value and provides no value. So, and yeah, I think, what you could see is little shops, bodegas, even little ATMs crop up in the developing world where I could send a relative in, some part of Latin America or whatever, Bitcoin on their phone, and then they could go to an ATM and, kind of do this thing, and it could see the. By the way, this is a code that, by the way, if anybody wanted to, they could send Bitcoin to us using this code, because our address, CSNYC's address, is resident in that code, but you could do the same thing. I could send you Bitcoin, you would get that on your phone and go, and it would spit out, whatever. In Malawi, they have these things called kwachas.
Do you think that the Bitcoin would be more stable, like there'd be a flat rate at which you'd send? Because Western Union, the prices change based on where you're sending it, and that kind of change in price makes people
I think if you use a global system like Bitcoin, it's worth the same thing everywhere in the world. So I think that's one of the huge advantages of it. So I think you identified a great opportunity. Go build it.
I will.
Hello, I represent Nifty under Gentech, and we're also a coding program. I had a question. When Bitcoin becomes a currency, and getting back on that hard cap, that can go away, the hard cap, what actually is going to stop people from just making themselves billionaires or millionaires?
Yeah, I don't think you can get rid of the hard cap.
So it's always going to, no matter what,
no,
that
I
hard
think,
cap?
I think an idea that some people have proposed, which I think might have some merit. I'm not going to take another question from the microphone, so sorry about that. The idea some people proposed is some formula where 21 million becomes 21.1 million next year and 21.2 million the year after that, or something like that that has some small inflationary factor that's maybe pegged to the velocity of Bitcoin or something like that. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it wouldn't just go away, right? There has to be some number that people have confidence in that is a limit, right? Because you're right, if it's unlimited, then it has no value.
Yeah, but you see how that 21.1 million went up?
Right.
Who made that? Like you guys?
Well, it would
get
have
that?
to be built into the core system, right? It would have to be there have to be some algorithm in the core system that determines what that is.
Okay, thank you.
You've had your hand up for a lot, so no, not you, right behind you.
Following up on her great question about the developing world, can you comment on your view of Mozilla's announcement about the $25 smartphone?
Well, I mean, I think that getting technology, to price points that can, we have, the interesting thing is that we only have the internet and technology in the hands of maybe a third of the people who live on planet Earth. I'm not sure I have that number exactly right, but it's not too far from that, right? So anything we can do to put the internet and smartphone with a Bitcoin wallet and a browser and a bunch of other things in it in the hands of people who today can't afford it, in my mind, is maybe the single most important thing we can do as a society. So I'm hugely supportive of that idea, whether it's the Mozilla effort or some other effort that's ultimately going to figure out how to do it. I don't know. I love the people at Mozilla, and I think that that's a great project. But the mission, the vision, I think is spot on. I'm going to go over here, and you right there. You've had your hand up a lot, so I'm going to reward you for that. So insurance. So you're bringing up a really interesting issue, and I expect that we will see a number of these services offer insurance. But the problem with that is I don't think that the insurance will scale. So, let's say that there's that Coinbase has $1 billion of Bitcoin. That's not accurate, by the way. That's not an accurate number at all. But let's just say they did. They could probably put together a syndicate of insurers that could insure all of their customers for that $1 billion. But when that $1 billion becomes $10 billion or $100 billion or $1 trillion, the insurance is just not going to scale. So I think you'll see a lot of companies implement insurance early on to try to increase that trust. But I think that it's going to be problematic for insurance to be, private insurance to be the answer. And I don't think the government's going to come in anytime soon. But there's an interesting thing, and I'll talk about it for a second, even though Cindy's giving me the hook. Most hosted wallets, I would say all hosted wallets, have hot storage and cold storage. Hot storage is a very small amount of the total Bitcoin that they have is connected to the internet. It's only the portion that is likely to have to go in and out at any one time. And all the other Bitcoin that they have is on storage devices, usually in vaults, like safe deposit vaults, you know, kind of things we used to use for valuable items and stuff. I guess some of us still do. And that's the cold storage. So the interesting thing is, what if these companies would only insure the hot wallet, right? Would that give people enough confidence? Well, for me, it would give me enough confidence, but it's sort of a technicality that a lot of people don't understand right now. So I think while that's probably the right answer long term, is to not bother insuring stuff that's in the vault unconnected to the internet, but just insure the stuff that's hot. I think today it would be a better message to consumers that everything's insured. And so the scalability issue might mean just insuring the hot wallet long term. Last question, I'm going to take it from over here, and I'm going to take it from a student. Someone who's, you right there. Have you asked a question before? Oh, no, no, then you don't get to ask. What are you?
I'm with 4 students.
Yes, you brought 4 students. You get to ask the last question.
So my name is Paul Marks. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a computer science director of a high school and the school system up there. I'm with All-Star Code, which is for boys of color age 14 to 17 who break into the computer industry and computer science education and whatnot. My question is, what's stopping Google and some of the other big ones, you sort of touched on it, from licking their chops and saying, I invented bytecode, I'm going to take a bytecode, I invented this and that. And also, if all these other players come into the market, who's going to regulate it? Is the government going to take the grip?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first, because that's the easier one. They're going to regulate it. It's already happening. You've got the IRS with rules. You've got FinCEN, who's basically requiring money transfer licenses. You've got state regulators. You've got the Fed putting pressures on the banks that are connecting in. So there is more regulation on Bitcoin right now than anybody would ever want to admit. Like, don't start a Bitcoin company if you don't want to have a compliance officer and you don't want to have a lawyer, you don't want to spend 10 or 20% of the time thinking about that. So that, unfortunately, is not an issue. The government's all over this. In terms of the big companies, I think if they try to build a proprietary version of Bitcoin, that's going to fail, because I think developers aren't going to want to build to something. They don't want to build to Google's Bitcoin or Amazon's Bitcoin. They want to build to, you know, an open protocol that everybody's using. I think if Google comes in and starts competing with companies like Coinbase and BitPay and Blockchain and Circle and Zappo, which are some of the better funded companies, I think that would be very good. Maybe not for these companies, but I think it would be very good for Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin prices would go way up if that were to happen. And I think that, as I said before, I think the more competition in a market, the better.
Can I do a follow-up?
Sure.
Google controls everything. What happens if Google wipes all you guys out, grabs everything, and they're basically the main middleman?
Well, you know, the funny thing is they haven't done that in a lot of areas. Like, look at Amazon Web Services, right? Amazon Web Services is the dominant platform that startups and small companies build to. Google tried to build something. Google, what was it called? App Engine? not really that big, right? In search, they're dominant. They are increasingly dominant in email and calendaring. They split the market here in the US on the mobile phone with Apple. I mean, they're a big and powerful company. If anybody could do it, I'd put my money on them, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. I like to think that anybody can compete with anybody, and the more open the platform, like the internet and Bitcoin, the more likely that's going to be the case. So anyway, thank you, everybody. So just a couple things. Oftentimes after a talk like this, people like line up to talk to me or pitch me, and I really don't mind that. But the weird thing is that I either have to stick around for an hour and a half so that every single person gets a chance to talk to me, or I have to cut people off after 2 minutes. So I'm going to stick around and happy to chat with anybody, but I'm going to probably cut a lot of people off and try to make those conversations brief, mostly out of respect for the other people who might want to do the same thing. And I am going to cut out of here. It's about 8. I am going to cut out of here by around 8:30, just because I haven't eaten, and at some point I'm going to get, you know, what's that commercial where the people get angry because they're hungry? I'm going to turn into that guy at some point tonight. Anyway, thank you, everybody.